Welcome to Brightly, You Radiant Being, the show that wildly recognizes, encourages, and invests in the radiance we all carry so you can shine your brightest. We're just a couple curious people interested in friendship, ideas, and personal development. This is a show that strives to speak to the curious, to those who long to explore new ways of thinking, reflecting, and being. Through sharing our experiences, friendship, and interests, we hope to impact you to step more brightly into yourself, inch by inch. Hi, Amy. How are you?
I am very well, surprisingly.
That's good
How
to
are
hear.
you? How are you?
Uh, I am in a much better place than when I came up with the idea for today's show. And we've been talking about it quite a bit during our pre-show prep. I'm a little anxious today, and I think it's because not that we usually have a script, but it's way less formatted than ever
Mhm.
before, wouldn't you say?
Yes, yes. And I think that probably because you and I have talked about it so much, we didn't feel like we needed to format it much, but we honestly do want to talk about how we are doing right now and how we've been doing and how you all are doing.
Yeah, I mean, a huge foundation of the show, we call ourselves the Brightly Podcast. It's to help people step more brightly into themselves. And, we've said it in past episodes, especially the shadow work one. Sometimes stepping more brightly into yourself means stepping into the darkness,
Yes.
acknowledging and validating where you're at now, where you
Mhm.
have been, and not just
Yeah.
trying to be the shining beacon of light all the time.
Right. It's never ignoring the dark places or the dark feelings. We would never want anyone to spiritually bypass anything or ignore anything. But we're hoping to just give you some tools to be able to maybe not stay in those places so long.
Well, and being your brightest self to me does not mean always being happy and joyful,
Right. Right.
right? It means showing up as your full self. And it just reminds me of this quote, and I don't know if the quote has an owner. If it does, we'll put it in the show notes, but it's happiness and sadness run parallel to each other. When one takes a rest, the other one steps up, or takes its
Oh,
place.
yeah.
And I think, so if it's not clear already, if you didn't read the show notes and don't know what the show is about, we've now marked a full calendar year of living differently, living a little more alone or a little bit more together, as part of or the result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've shared in past episodes. I try not to bring up the P word, the C word, have this show just be a broader focus and people can apply the topics to their life for where they are, especially if they're not listening in real time.
Mhm.
Not wanting to be a downer or negative Nancy necessarily, because to me, my podcasts are my escapism. I don't
Mhm.
always want to be hearing about the here and now. I watch and read the news for that. But I've been seeing more and more on social media, my friends, people I personally know and talk to and engage with, who haven't been super open or honest or forthcoming about how they're really doing, yet they're
Mhm.
also sharing these posts and stories on Instagram, about mental health, about supporting people where they are, about how hard it is to be a mom right now, about how hard it is to
Mhm.
be a spouse or a partner or be alone. Yet when I check in with them and ask how they are, I'm fine. Um, and I know, Amy, you ask how I am, off air, and I do that too. I do there's a meme right now, and it's I'm fine, fine.
I'm fine.
I don't know what's going on right now, but I'm fine. My anxiety is off the charts, but I'm fine. I'm fine. And I'm not fine.
So I'll just share that I can't remember when it was, Tracy. It was like 2 weeks ago, or when it was when you said, "Oh, it wasn't on air." You said, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm fucking awesome." And sort of how I felt at that time was like, "Oh, I'll tell you how I'm doing by telling you how I'm doing." And
Right?
I'm really not doing that, but I'm saying that.
And how many of us, when we ask someone how they're doing, or when we're asked how we're doing, you don't even think about it. You just
No.
respond, because it's not
Mm-hmm.
I think of all the times I ask that and I genuinely mean it, but it's also, I'm, pre-pandemic obviously, but I'm in a break room at work. It's not really the location
Right.
for somebody to share how they're doing, or it's just before a meeting's about to start. And I definitely, I have people that when they seem off, I will reach out to them in a better location or time and inquire,
Hmm.
but not always. And they're not always honest, and I'm not
Right.
always honest when people do that to me.
Well, there does need to be a level of trust as well, whether you're going to answer it honestly or not, but also on on our part when we're asking it, do we actually want it on? Like, are we invested in the answer? Right.
Well, absolutely. I also wonder though, because when I think of my response, because I loved your "I'm doing effing awesome," it was so perfect and in the moment. And one of the things I have to remember when I share about myself, that I'm not, that's not me asking somebody to do something. Sometimes when you're not feeling your best, it feels like
Mhm.
a burden to tell other people, when really the best thing anyone could do is just hold space for the response.
Agree 100%. And honestly, I feel like human beings need to do a better job of holding space for other human beings. I think that's so important.
And I know I've had friends and family going through a hard time, and our shared connections have reached out to me like, oh, they're saying this, they're gonna do this, they're saying they feel this, what do I do? And it's, you don't have to do anything, because it's just this moment in time. Sometimes when you're feeling really, really down or really, really anxious, it's not necessarily a reflection of the decisions future you will make, if that makes sense. And
Mm.
so I think some people feel stressed holding space because it feels like a problem that needs to be solved.
Right. We're always there to say, well, have you tried this? Have you thought about that? What about this? Because I don't know if we're raised as problem solvers, or it feels safer to just be like, let me solve it for you. And then I don't have to hold that space for you.
Yeah, and
I
Brene
don't know.
Brown has a great video with RSA on the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I think if more people, not only studied or looked into what active listening is, and which is
Mhm.
essentially holding space, but understood the difference between that, and that empathy is really about, wow, I really feel that. Not that
Mhm.
you imagine going through it or that you can remember a time you've experienced it, but that you're in that emotion with them in the
Right.
moment, and not solving that problem.
Right.
So, Amy, how are you really right now? You said you're doing great. So right now, like I said, just for context, this will air mid-March 2021, almost just a couple days after the 1-year anniversary of the United States having a lot of regulations put on them. So
Yeah.
we've been working from home for a
Mhm.
year. We
Mhm.
now know, we work at the same organization. We now know it's going through mid-September at least.
That will be working from home.
That will be
Whereas
working from
other people who we work with are actually, forward
service. Yeah.
facing, right, in service positions and forward facing. So they are in buildings and out there. So that's also another thing. I mean, right now, I actually am doing pretty well because of external situations, right? The sun was shining today. It was literally 62 degrees today, this day that we're recording. So that can help a lot if you can get outside. So that, of course, made me feel better, but not just today. I have been feeling a little bit better. Um, but I think I mentioned to you, Tracy, just because you feel better doesn't mean class is over, right?
Right.
So I can feel good in the moment. I feel like that's sort of another thing with Brightly. Like it's okay to feel good in the moment, right? It's okay to feel good right now, even if you're looking at something that might be happening in the future or that did happen in the past. It's okay to feel a certain way right now.
I love that you bring that up, because that's something I think a lot of people forget, is that we're not one track emotions. It's kind of like how I say time is fluid, it's a
Yeah.
social construct. you know, you can be in the stages of immense grief and still find total happiness in a moment. And it doesn't take away from your grief. And that grief shouldn't steal from that moment of happiness.
Right.
It, it's,
Right.
it's really difficult when feelings contradict themselves like that. It's
Mhm.
such a juxtaposition of feelings, but you can be going through so many emotions and feelings at any one time. And especially right now, every single thing is unprecedented. So it's not even just the pandemic that we've been
Right.
going through, but a lot of social injustices are coming to light, and especially in Minneapolis, where we're both based,
Right.
it's been a real representation in the
Mhm.
public
Mhm.
sphere of that.
Well, right. And I think that right now, I mean, whether we talk about like from the beginning or not, but right now I can say I'm doing fine, with also the realization that we're almost coming full circle because we are getting ready for the trial,
Mhm.
and it is here in Minneapolis. And of course, this is where George Floyd was murdered. And so now we're coming up with the trial for his murder.
Mhm.
Um, and that once again brings everything up for everyone worldwide. It brings up things worldwide, and yet it also brings up, for I think for us, because we live in the state, in this, we work for the county, where, well, I shouldn't have said
Past
that,
in place.
but anyways.
We've brought it
Yeah,
up before. Yeah,
yeah,
we
that
we
I
don't work for the
feel
county attorneys or the sheriff or
yeah,
anything. We're very different disciplines, but
right. But
um,
it feels very much like the eyes of the world are on
mhm.
us. And also it just brings up feelings of anxiety because of the things that happened last year.
Oh,
If
a mile and
if
a half from my house was on fire,
right.
last June, July,
Mhm.
I felt very safe where I was, but I could hear and smell the destruction. And so just knowing that, like you said, for right now, we're coming up to that could be a possibility as well, in
Well,
addition to the emotions of the trial outcome itself.
right. And I guess I was actually thinking more about the emotions, but I live in a suburb and I'm a little bit removed from the impact of what this could do, but I'm not removed from the impact of the emotions. And in fact, like I shared with you, when the pandemic first hit and we were sent home, there was feelings of like, oh, I get to work from home. Like this could be an opportunity to, for whatever, I don't even know. And then there was just, of course, there were actually a series of incidences. And then it was George Floyd's murder. And then it was just this weight, this crushing weight of my privilege, my culpability in it. And essentially what happened is like I didn't do it, I wasn't doing anything for anyone, right? It
Mhm.
was just crushed in this weight of this thing. And then finally, when I was like, okay, you either have to do something or you have to do something. And
Yeah.
then once I started to just like educate myself and talk to people and start learning and accepting things and writing to politicians. And actually, I went on one march. I'm not that brave, but I did go on one march, and it's just because my son was going as well. That actually sort of moved me forward to be able to take other steps. So it was like I was in these two different realities of COVID and social injustice and racial inequality and white supremacy, and just, anyways, sorry about that.
Okay,
So
let's start this new trend where we don't apologize for how we're feeling.
right, exactly. So just thinking about the trial brings it all back. And I am a woman who lives in the suburbs, and I'm white, and I'm privileged, and I am so full, like I can look in the future and feel that anxiety of the future. So when I think about friends who are Black and who possibly have children and maybe grown young men for children and what they are feeling, I can hardly stand it. But I can't get crushed under the weight, because then I'm not I'm not doing anything with a purpose, and I'm not helping anyone that way.
That's a beautiful way to help move yourself to action. I think that's really great that
Right.
you could do that. I want to bring it back to the how are you feeling though portion of it. And not only are you holding your feelings, but you're holding the feelings of the people in your circle and people you don't even know.
Yeah.
That higher level empathy and compassion. And one of the things our employer talks a lot about, even before, the events of the past year, is compassion fatigue. And I feel like this time that we're in, uh you feel the weight of your privilege so much for having a home, having a job, having your health, that you don't allow yourself to recognize the negative feelings that you might be having.
Ooh, Tracy, yeah, that you're so right, because it feels to me like I don't have a right to have any feelings that I might be having.
Hmm. And, no matter where you are in the world, it doesn't make your loss any less. And I think the one thing the events of the past year have really shown us is it's just been a loss of so many things. How we
How,
live.
yeah, how about you? I want to hear from you. Like, what are you feeling?
So, as I said when the show started, I'm feeling so much better than I was when I came up for the concept
Mhm.
of this.
Well,
Um,
I was too until I started talking.
I so I know I had initially said I wanted to start with where I am, but I am going to backtrack to March because you kind of brought up a really good point. When this first started, I knew I was secure in my job for at least the year, for how the county, for our employer does the budget, and for my role in it. And I had really frank, open discussions with my boss. I knew I had a really good understanding that I had a job. It didn't alleviate anxieties of I've been unemployed in the past. The last recession did not treat me well. And so I kind of had that in the back of my head, but I was trying to downplay that with the facts that I knew. I was just trying to remind myself what I had. I have a home, I have a yard, I have access to an amazing park to walk through. I have internet access and I have the tools to connect virtually with my friends and family. And I had the finances to be able to purchase hobbies to keep me busy or stream or things like that. And so when this first started, I was under that mindset of, the old British mindset, keep calm and carry on.
Yeah.
That this is something, regardless of where you feel now on the politics of it, that's not what this show is about. But I felt I don't have a medical background. I don't have a lot of skills that are really helpful for what was needed at the time. So, how I can help my community, how I can help people I don't know and my loved ones is I can stay home and I will stay home. And I took that to heart a little too well. So, when this first started, I just thought kind of similar to you, I'll work from home. I'm an introvert, not to downplay the severity of people who were ill, people who are still struggling with illness, and people who lost loved ones and people who lost
Mhm.
their lives. Keeping that in mind, I I was going to take this as a time to focus on hobbies, get projects done at the house, just try and keep busy while doing what I could do to support.
Mhm.
Um, I utilized every day I went for a morning walk. On weekends, I'd drive to I just drive north on a freeway in the first state park I saw. I'd go to that. And then the next weekend, I drive a little further until all of a sudden I'm 40 miles from Canada having to go back. And so for the majority of the past year, I did okay. I really did okay. Similar to you, I couldn't come up with a complaint and just I was fine. I had anxieties about people I loved. My grandmother, who's in her late 80s, she did contract COVID and she was sick for a really long time. We had a lot of end of life planning discussions, a lot of really hard discussions about because she does have COVID and because of how assisted living facilities are, only 3 people can see her
Mhm.
total if we feel that she's about to pass. And it's not 3 people at a time due to contract tracing and what they were doing. We had to have a conversation about what 3 people that would be.
Mm.
And I was really hopeful the entire time that she's gonna pull through, and thankfully she did, but worrying about her, knowing that she has nobody in her life around her, that she's hard of hearing, she's suffering from, the after effects of a stroke from a few years ago and doesn't really understand what's going through. And so I was really outwardly focused towards, the end of summer, early fall. Then the holidays came and it became hard discussions with family and friends about I it, it's not over because you're over it. That I,
Right.
we
There's
to put a
there's no
phrase.
magical thinking
Yeah.
going on here.
Yeah, and we have a public health department at our employer, and due to my role before this even started, I talked to them a lot about different things, and I'm a rule follower. If I don't, if it's not hurting somebody, I'm gonna do it as hard as it is.
Mhm.
And so I did the holidays virtually, and family wanted to come and drop off gifts, and I made them wear masks, and some had to stay outside, some got to come in briefly, and it was really hard because it kind of becomes a dividing line between family and friends for how you're
Mhm.
reacting to the current state we're in.
Yes.
Um, and just recognizing that when this is over, am I going to forget how certain people that were in my life acted during it and what privileges that I feel were um, exploited?
Mhm.
And so then that became really hard for me because the more and more things I turned down that they were starting to do in person, the less and less we did virtually together.
Sure. Because
Um,
they didn't see a need because they were doing it in person.
but also I think on their end as well, everybody is entitled to their beliefs and
Mhm.
feelings, and so I think they're now looking at me differently too, or feeling judged,
Okay.
or we just
Mhm.
haven't really had the open conversations like this. And so that's after a year that was already went predominantly to text message communications. That at the start of the year, we did family Zoom calls, Google Meets, silly things in hats, have virtual happy hours. And then people got over that real quick,
Mhm.
and summer
Mhm.
hit, so people could do more outside. But the majority of my family and friends have small kids. And so the women in my life, my friends, took on more roles.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
And the times when they didn't have something they had to do where they had to relax, they just needed their me time. I mean, most moms, parents, dads need their me time in general. You hold so many roles for so many people.
Mhm.
But it just became less and less likely that we were going to, watch a movie together online, and so for me, I was already pretty introverted and secluded before this all started. And so to lose the events that I would go to, or seeing, friends occasionally and all that, and then go to only text message conversation. Um, by January, I got hit really hard with anxiety,
Yeah.
really hard. And so, I see therapists. I really like a lot of holistic modalities and things like that. And
Mhm.
so I sought out CBD gummies, which are totally legal, not the fun stuff, but they're meant to help a lot with anxiety and mood. And January became one long anxiety attack, and I actually got really nervous, and I reached out to a physician to schedule, but it was going to be 6 weeks before I could get in because my physician was no longer in her practice. And so anybody
Mhm.
I saw was going to be a new client intake.
Mhm.
And so in February, that led to just feeling really depressed, that I have all this anxiety and now I'm really feeling the depression. And we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago, but it was kind of like
Mhm.
that third Wednesday in January where it's really dark. You're in winter. And in Minnesota, February is kind of the worst. January is not so bad. And then you get to February, and if you're barely holding it
Yeah.
together,
I
it's,
mean,
yeah.
talk about the dark night of the soul, right?
Yes, thank you. Um, but so about mid-February, so I only did the CBD gummies in January, and then when it ran out, I went to reorder and they were out, and I was like, well, let's see if there's a difference because January was really hard. I started to get better. And so after talking to some friends, family, and my practitioners, apparently CBD can cause anxiety in
Yeah.
some people. And that's me. So
And that's me.
that's me. So when I say I'm doing a lot better than before, I think
Mhm.
it's just my mood. Like you said, it's sunny out, it's warm out.
Mhm.
Because I was in such a low place, I got better at talking to people about what was going on and asking. Like you and I, are some of our after show conversations went on for 90 minutes after we just
Right.
talked to each other for a couple hours. So that really helped. I see a functional medicine practitioner who put me on some herbs that are supposed to,
Mhm.
so like St. John's wort and some other things like that. And I had been looking at online all these different things that could do things. And I was like, well, do they react with each other? Do they work well with each other? When's the best time to take it? Oh my God, do I want to take 10 pills? And he's like, no, this has all of that in one.
Nice.
Like, I felt so lucky. I mean,
Yeah.
he's expensive to see. The pills are expensive over time, but I just had the appointment with my new doctor, and we both felt that, we'll make a note for possibly needing to talk about anxiety or depression medication in the future, but I'm doing better.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm doing okay. But that makes me nervous for the future.
Mhm.
So, today, the past 3 days, past week have actually been really great. The small things like doing dishes and getting ready for the day and you know, commuting to work in my dining room
Right.
don't take like a 12-step action plan or a to-do list. They're just done. So looking at today Tracy versus January Tracy,
Mhm.
leaps and bounds different. Um, and so that's why I love that you brought up, just because you feel better doesn't mean class is over. Because as I think
Right.
about the future, if this physical distancing is to continue, and like I mentioned,
Mhm.
we're working from home until September at the
Mhm.
earliest. For the type of work I do, work from home is probably going to become more of a feature, not a requirement, but
Right.
before I worked in the
Well,
office three
and
or
you
four
and
days. Huh?
right. You and I have talked about this before where even, as an introvert, there is a part of you that's like, yes, I like to work at home.
Yep.
But when you're in the office, those little tiny interactions helped boost
Hmm.
your emotions. Well, as long as they were good interactions, right?
Right.
With people who you like to see. They're just like little bite-sized snacks of interactions, right? And you've lost that. So,
And I think, we have plans to do a future show about friendship and especially adult friendship. But for
mhm,
me, I'm currently single and I don't have any children. And all of my friends have done a really good job of staying in touch that have kids, but it's not like it was before. And like I said before, they just have or it happens when women get married too, or
mhm,
my friends when they got married, they just take on so many more roles. They're now a
mhm,
daughter-in-law, they're white, and they have their jobs and their things. And so for me, work became the place where I went out to lunch once or twice a week, where we'd do happy hours or we'd go and take a walk and we'd chat. And so I had all these work friendships.
mhm.
And just before the pandemic, I left that office and went to another one where I'm now in a division of two and only talk to my boss regularly. I talk to other people all day, but they're like 6-week check-ins. And so I think I was already kind of feeling a loss just before the pandemic. And social isolation, physical distancing has made me recognize what I don't have in my life right now that I want. And
Well, and I feel that, that this has been discussed a lot, that the COVID, the pandemic really shone a light on many things that
mm,
were lacking in society and that things that really need to be shorn up. And of course, I think for you, is it a good thing that this like light was shown on it? Do you feel like now maybe afterwards you'll maybe be more intentional with certain things, or how are you feeling about that? Or are you just anxious?
Well, therapist Amy. um, so I think I kind of knew it before,
Mhm,
but was able to stay busy enough while kind of waiting for those things to organically come into my life, not,
mhm.
I now know, but like there's a dating app called Bumble that also has a Bumble BFF feature where if you just
I've seen that.
yeah, that
Yeah,
gives me more anxiety than the dating one. I don't know why. But all of my friendship, like you and we just, I don't even know when we became friends,
I know.
but somehow, like, we'd bump into each other, say hi. One of us would see something in the other person's office or cubicle, and then we just start talking about things. And so for me to be like, oh gosh, I need more friends, and to think of it more of a dating profile and like what type of friend do I want just seems so weird. But I'm also, I'm 36. I'm in my mid 30s. Like
Yeah,
you kind of have to pick your friends that way. You're not going to find that one best friend that covers everything. I mean, at this age, your spouse doesn't
right.
even cover every aspect of your life.
And there's just so many times at work that you can, go up to people and say, want to be friends? Right? It just doesn't remember when you used to do that as a kid. Hey, want to be friends? Yes. Okay, good.
Well, and then everywhere I work, I change jobs quite frequently. I like to, now that I'm where I just changed departments, which is great. But so
Mhm,
every 2 to 3 years, I'd be starting somewhere, and I'd always be the new girl. And it was always really hard to make friends with colleagues that weren't in your immediate work circle, even in a
mhm,
small company of like 20 people. And I'll
mhm.
never forget that, I started as a temp somewhere once during the week of 4th of July. And so it was just me and like 3 or 4 other people there. Um, and so then when everybody came back, it was just like, oh yeah, the new girl started. Oh, the temp started. And I was in the copy room, and this gentleman just walked up to me and goes, "Oh, you're new. I'm Mike. Nice to meet you." And that is now how I introduce myself to new people all the time. Whether they're in my department or not, if I find out somebody new is working for my company or whatever, I go and I find them and I introduce myself to them, tell them where I sit, and I ask them to go to lunch. And if it carries on from there, it carries on from there. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But what I find is those work relationships only last as long as you're working there.
This is true. Yes.
So,
However, I would say that there are relationships, but okay. So I worked at the first library I worked there for 15 years. And so had had several good relationships that have continued, but one specifically that continued, and we work at trying to
yes.
stay in touch with each other. But I agree with you. It's that's so unfortunate.
But so going back to your question though, like, will I be more intentional moving forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I actually was intentional before, but I was just at this space. I was starting a new job, things were busy enough. And then, like you said, this just shone a light on, oh, you don't
Hmm.
have like, you're not, I'm not dating anybody. I'm not seeing somebody. I don't have a significant other, so to speak. And
Hmm.
so, like, oh, wow, like there's not a lot here, but like I do have friends. And I think
I'm one.
so, and what's funny is I once said I had my little 7-year-old niece here, and she had a sleepover, and you and I were gonna have a chat. And
Yeah.
so she had to go away so you and I could have
Just a
our
regular chat, not a
just
podcast chat.
well, it was yeah, right. And so she was spending the night, and so I was like, you just have to keep yourself busy for an hour. And I gave her a bunch of stuff to do. And she kept trying to come and chat with us or whatnot. So then the next day when we were talking, because she was struggling with friendship, she's 7 years old, and she was kind of feeling the same way we are. And so we were talking about that. And I was like, well, I really only have like one really good best friend, and I had my friend Rosie in mind.
Mhm.
And she goes, but you have Amy. And I was like, I do have Amy. How dare I forget I have Amy? I just had like this concept of like this person you go to with everything. Poor Rose,
Right.
she's practically my spouse. Like, I don't know how she deals with it. When I intentionally try and give her space, she reaches out and was like, "You were quiet today. Is everything okay?"
Oh, that's so
And
wonderful.
and so it took my 7-year-old niece reminded me like, well, you have so and so. And then I just sat down and I listed out and I was like, I don't talk to all these people every day and these people don't reach out to me, but I do have way more friends than I think I do. So to
Mm-hmm.
your point, like I am more intentional now that I'm in a better place about reaching out to people and
Mm-hmm.
seeing how they are and being okay if they don't have the capacity to either respond, and be really vulnerable or just engage in general as a friend. Or if they don't have, the capacity to ask how I am, that's okay too. I think there are times during this past year where it hit me really hard. You feel ashamed. The just right when this all started, the Surgeon General was on a podcast for, I want to say NPR or something like that. It was just a
Mm-hmm.
brief little one, but he, even before the physical distancing and all that requirements and suggestions, was talking about how loneliness is a pandemic itself,
Yes.
and the physical and mental tolls it can take on a person.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found really interesting is when you find yourself feeling really alone, you tend to isolate yourself more. That you tend to feel shame and embarrassment, and that it's because of something you're doing wrong. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what kind of bullshit evolutionary, reason that exists.
Right.
And when that podcast came into my life, I really needed to hear that like, it's okay not to have friends. And why is that a precursor to making more friends or feeling worthy and valid of relationships?
Oh my gosh, why is it a precursor to having more friends? Is it one of those things like, when you walk by a restaurant, well, pre-COVID, when you walk by a restaurant and no one was in there, you didn't want to go in there, right? You're like, well, that can't be good. But if like most of the tables were filled, you're like, oh, that looks like fun. At least that's how it was for me, right? Or a store, but I don't know. It's just like one of those things. Well, if they like it, then I'll probably like it. So for myself, like, oh, well, if I have friends, other people would be attracted to
Yes,
my
the vibe.
friendliness or
Mhm.
whatever, the friend vibe. Yeah.
Well, and you feel like you know where you stand, that you're worthy of friendship because you're already getting that
Right.
feedback loop of you're a friendly person or you're this
Right.
or where you stand in that group.
Yeah.
So when you have it, and I've brought it up before, I was going on a trip with mutual friends. We all knew one same person and we're aware of the others, but I was like,
Yeah. What do you
what do I
bring?
bring to the group?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so many people were like, well, you'll be the mom of the group. And I was like, there are literal moms in this group. And so how many of us kind of like look at our current worth and where we sit in our relationships as what we would bring to a future relationship? Like,
Hmm.
I
And
could,
it's not even our current worth, it's our
yeah,
made up current
exactly.
worth.
It's the label we're in.
Right.
So, okay, so we've spent quite a bit of time talking about
Yeah.
social isolation and loneliness. I want to talk about the flip side because you've brought this up about yourself and friends, and
Yeah.
and I've heard about it from others, but I've been really alone and dealing with the aloneness.
Hmm.
On the flip side of it, a lot of people have been living on top of each other
Hmm.
and just need a moment alone.
Hmm.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about what that's like? Because you live with your husband, correct? And
Yeah. And so I was going to say the funny thing is, but it's not funny. It's actually a good thing is that typically we, we, we have such a weird arrangement to begin with is he has a man cave. So he has the coolest garage setup ever, right? He's got his TV, he's got a stereo, he's got a refrigerator, he's got a hammock, he's got a comfortable chair, like it's heated. It's a beautiful space.
can
Every
we
time,
borrow it for International Women's Day?
no, seriously. Yeah. Yeah. It's anytime people come over to the house, they want to go in the garage. I, it's just so we've always joked that is that's the secret to our success is that he has this man cave. So it doesn't feel like we are living on top of each other. We have more time together because I am working from home. So, I don't have the commute and he's typically home before I am. So I'm home now and then he comes home. But the interesting thing that's happened with this is that instead of us getting like irritated with each other, it's actually opened up just all kinds of conversations. So not only because of the pandemic and just being with each other more and talking more, because of what happened early last year, with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we've just had very open and frank discussions and talk a lot. And it's I don't think we've ever had the conversations that we're having this past year. And what that does, okay, let me back up a little bit. So we have these conversations and we leave space for the other person and we listen, and neither one of us are judging. We're just talking and we're sharing, and maybe there's like teaching or whatever, but it's opened us up to have other conversations that maybe we wouldn't have had before, right? Because maybe it felt just too vulnerable or whatever. So I realize, again, super lucky with this, that we actually like, we love each other, but we actually like each other, and we like spending time with each other, and we like talking to each other. The other thing that happened for me is kind of like what you said. There was a point where I was just like, I just don't feel like I have enough interactions. And I have a really good friend from high school who I knew from Rhode Island. And it was like, we saw each other last February. She actually came here and we went out in real life and saw each other. And it's the first time we'd seen each other in years. So I was like, why don't I just text her and say, hey, let's have a Zoom coffee or a Zoom happy hour or whatever. And she was all for it. And now we've had 3. So it's just one of those things. Like, I feel like for me, it's opened up some opportunities.
I have to agree with you on that, because you and I, prior to last year, like I said, I had been away from our shared office or department for about a year.
Yeah.
And whenever I'd go back to that department, we'd end up talking for an hour.
I know.
But we didn't really do too much outside of work. Every now and then I'd set up a lunch with people, and you'd come if you were able to join the group, which was always great. But we weren't talking on the phone prior to that. We weren't, you'd been here once before, but nothing regular or any type of that. And somehow we just decided to reconnect over Zoom. Like we had IM'd or texted or something, and then we started doing regular Zoom chats. The podcast was born from that.
I don't know that we'd be doing this podcast if it weren't because of the pandemic, right?
I don't think so. I think, you had mentioned, you and Rick, your husband, you had a good relationship before this, but you've been having conversations you wouldn't have had before.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just what's going on. I think we all have an abundance of time and we're able to connect. Because you might have been spending that time together, but what would you have been talking about? And I feel like you and I, for how our relationship was, every time we'd bump into each other or would hang out, it would become that thing that old friends do, where it's an hour to 2 hours of just rehashing where you've been since the last time you're together. And then, oh, we should do this again sometime. And then it's another 4-6 months before you. Whereas since nothing was going on in our lives, every time we chat, oh, same old, it would kind of force us to, have a deeper conversation and talk about.
You're right. Different conversation, deeper conversation. I hadn't thought about it like that.
I saw something on TikTok recently, that neurodivergent people, so like people with ADHD, this girl joked that the thing that she struggles with the most is having to constantly reset neurotypical people. That every time you bump into a friend, you have to start over again with, hi, how are you? You can't just pick up from where you left off. And I was like, oh my God, I'm neurodivergent, because I immediately pick up from where I left off. And that's how I know who is really my friend and who isn't, is by who goes along with it. Not that I don't catch up with people, but I usually just dive into what I've been reading. And, oh yeah, we talked about this. Oh, that was 9 months ago. What? And so I feel like with the pandemic, we don't have to reset each other. We know what we're all doing. You know, it's not a whole lot of anything lately.
Right.
And
Right.
so then that brings me to something else we've been talking about lately, which is that concept of people using "How are you" as a greeting or as just something that's just a part of their interaction template, you know, their script in their head.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate it. I never know. In Minnesota, I never know if somebody's actually asking how I am or if that's how they say hi. And so I feel stupid regardless of how I choose to answer, whether I skirt by it or say I'm great. And then they're like, oh crap, now I have to pretend I'm interested. But so, I mean, how do you know if it's a greeting or a genuine inquiry? How do
Right.
you interpret someone's meaning? How do you answer? Are you
You know, honestly, I feel like I don't even know if you're asking me that question or not, but
imagine?
I'm going to answer it. And I feel that you and I have talked about this before. It's that level of trust again. Like if you ask me how I'm doing outside of the podcast, I will tell you how I'm doing. If someone who I rarely see, like, oh, I'm just visiting this library and somebody says, how are you? I'm just going to be like, things are going well. You know, they're going well. And I won't feel bad about it because I treat it like you just said. It's just sort of a salutation, right?
Mhm.
Hi, how are you? It's a salutation. And so if I'm busy, if it looks like they're busy, it's just like, I'm fine. But if my husband asks me, or a
Mhm.
child asks me, or you ask me, or another friend asks me, and I can tell that they actually want to know, then I will tell them.
Mhm. And what about when so I we've talked off air about this before, and please let me know if that's really annoying to hear us preface all the time. So, there are a couple people in my life who I interact with kind of similarly to if I was in the office. You know, you see them in passing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They're more than acquaintances, but they're not quite friends. And so kind
Mm-hmm.
of like that's an odd place as in an adult friendship to be in general. But I feel like I know them and of them enough that, when we pass and I say, oh, hey, how are ya? And they say, oh, living the dream. That's a really sad dream. I'm sorry. And
Yeah.
I want to be like, do you want to talk? But I also feel like, well, they answered as they did. Like, is that an opening? Like, am I, you know,
Right. Is that just another like rebuttal
is it
to the
like,
salutation,
is it
right?
a
Living the
trust
dream.
fall? Like, if you
Yeah.
ask, like, are you really? Like, do I know it's safe to say it? I never know what to say, but I can tell when they're actually like, oh, I just don't really have anything to say. And sometimes I'm like, oh, you sound sad. But I also like this environment in our passing is not the time for me to ask, are you really doing
Yeah.
that? So I
Yeah.
came across something recently, this concept I love, and I'm going to try and start doing more. Whereas when I see people I care about, instead of automatically starting with, how are you? I'm going to just start with, it's really good to see you.
I love that
Isn't that
because
great?
it's it is in a way a salutation, but it also, just think how that makes the other person feel. So instead of saying, how are you? Sometimes when someone asks me, how am I? It's almost like I get anxious because it's like, do they want an answer? Do they not want an answer? Should I tell the truth? Should I not tell the truth?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden there's all these decisions that have to be made. But if someone says to me, it's really good to see you, you're like, oh, it's really good to see you too.
Yeah.
And
Or
then you
even
just go
like,
on from there.
I'm really happy to see you. I haven't
Yes.
seen you in a while, or I was hoping to run into you, or this is
Yes.
because this made me think of you. And then just
Yes.
starting a conversation and then maybe ending with the, "And how are you doing? How are you really doing lately?"
Right.
After, like you said, after you've
Yeah.
established that trust.
Yeah.
And then I've also found, in text messages, if somebody reaches out, instead of doing the, oh, thanks for reaching out, how you doing, and then doing the, I'm fine, kind of a thing, I'm just going to start, or I have started doing, it was really good to hear from you. If it
Mm.
was, and again, like this, don't be doing this if it wasn't good to hear from them. Everything
Don't be
should be
lying. Don't be
done with
lying to people.
authenticity. But yeah, I'm really happy to hear from you. It's good to hear from you. And then even just for like where I've been lately, like, oh, I've been really down lately. it's great, like I appreciate you taking this time for me.
Mhm.
Or, I had a friend, we were reaching out, we share resources back and forth. And she listens to the show. Hi, Sue. But I think one of us asked how the other one was doing or something like that. And we determined like we needed a call. And I was like, well, right now or like some predeterminate in the future, we should chat. And she's like, I'm in the moment. Let's do this. And we had a really good, authentic chat
Nice.
so that when texting, if you need a little bit more, I think sometimes to have these types of relationships that we kind of talk what we want, or if you're feeling lonely, you don't want to feel lonely anymore,
Mhm.
as much as it sucks, sometimes you have to be the vulnerable one. You can't wait for people to open up.
Honestly, Tracy, that's exactly how I was feeling. And that's why I reached out to that friend, was just like, hey, let's just do this. And then it was just super easy. Another thing, my sister and I, my one sister and I have started doing a Google Duo phone call,
Mhm.
because for us, it's so important to see each other's faces while we're talking, and because
It's
we're
different.
very,
It's
it
very
is it is different, but we also like, we're very, our faces go into all kinds of different contortions, and that's part of our conversation, is like things like that. Sorry if you're listening, I just made a horrible face, but anyways, it's so I'm happy. Sometimes I love just talking on the phone, but sometimes I do like to see the person's face as well. But I sort of got off topic. You do have to be vulnerable. Sometimes you do have to be the one to reach out. And if the other person says, no, I just don't have the time or whatever, that's okay.
yeah.
It's okay for them to say no too.
Yeah. So that was a
I
lot.
know. I know. We kind of went all over too. It's okay. It
So, I
felt like
mean,
we
we
needed
started this
to.
show by saying that we're doing great. Just to
Yeah.
affirm to everybody, I'm okay. I am okay. I'm not fine. I'm gonna say I am okay. Like I've up leveled from the I'm fine.
So I can't remember if I shared this again online or just with you, Tracy, but my dad, and I'm laughing, it's horrible. My dad was literally dying.
Mm.
He's dying of cancer, right? And this was 24 years ago. And he would say something and he'd go, well, that's okay. And then he'd go, well, it's not okay, but it's all right. And we knew what he meant. It was like, the one was like, it'll be okay. Well, no, it won't be okay, but it'll be all right.
Okay.
Like eventually it'll be all right,
It's that those parallel contradictions.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel like that's, if learning anything about myself throughout this entire pandemic, it's just I might have these moments where I don't feel okay and I'm not
Hmm.
okay, but I can recognize that my tenacity, my sense of self, and the people around me have pulled me through this before,
Hmm.
and to just keep looking forward to that to allow the bad days with no judgment or shame because it's okay.
Yeah.
It's not okay. It sucks. Validating your feelings when you're feeling bad is not saying that you accept them, that you approve of them. It's just allowing yourself to exist as you are.
Really good point. Yes.
So I hope, if anything, if this show, you know, maybe you are experiencing what we've been going through too, and you can feel a little bit of validation just that you're not alone. I bring up TikTok and other social media on the show a lot, and the one thing it's really helped me with during this pandemic is I've never had my own thought in my entire life, apparently, that I'm going through the exact same experience as like 20,000 other people who, thank God, they've put it online and created content out of it, because it's helped me feel more connected and less weird. So if anything, I hope it's that.
Less weird.
If you haven't connected to our exact experiences, maybe this show kind of came into your circle and you kept listening, and this is a way for you to reach out to maybe somebody in your life who you do know is alone throughout this pandemic.
Mhm.
Because I haven't wanted to say that to people, but just reminding people, I'm going through everything you're going through, and I'm doing it alone.
Mhm.
And just reaching out to people, even if you don't have an hour, even if it's just a text message. My neighbors, we're not super close friends. We have fires every now and then. We've been to each other's homes. They watch my cat when I go on vacation. They're just really nice stand-up men. Um, in January, I didn't go anywhere. I didn't do anything. I had everything delivered. And they reached out to me at the end of January, early February. I got a text from one, and then the other roommate actually shoveled my walkway. And when I opened the door to thank him, they both said kind of the same thing. We hadn't seen or heard from you in a little while, and we just wanted to make sure it was okay, and that it was, nothing bad had been happening. And even though I didn't feel in a place to be vulnerable with them and be like, no, it's not okay. I mean, I think I sent a silly Napoleon Dynamite meme of him playing tetherball by himself, to the person who texted and asked, what are you up to? Are you doing okay? But just them checking in, and that somebody noticing, like, I hadn't seen or heard from you in a while, no matter how long or short a time. I think that's kind of what helps my mood. So again, we're all experiencing these troubling, unprecedented times in different ways. And so just trying to put on the empathy hat a little bit. And then if you don't have capacity for that, if you are at that compassion fatigue, finding ways to reach out for help. So, I kind of started this show by saying, to be your brightest self, you have to acknowledge the bad and the good. So you got to feel your feelings. So just with that, if you're feeling, triggered by this episode, or if it's helping you realize that you do need support for a problem that's bigger than yourself, I find therapy is a really useful tool. A qualified professional can help you validate your feelings while helping you through whatever it is you're going through. They might not be an expert in exactly your situation, but they are the expert in the process of getting through it and helping you build that toolkit. So that, next time anything like this happens, whether it's loneliness or a pandemic or, huge social changes, civil unrest, you have a few more things to lean on to get you through it. So if you found yourself struggling and need or would like help, we encourage you to seek that support. If you're unsure where to turn, your primary care physician, if you have one, they may be able to provide referrals to professionals in your area. If you have medical insurance, oftentimes their website and plan documents will have a feature to connect you to covered providers in your area. And for those without medical insurance, there are many providers that bill on a sliding fee scale. So please don't let financial burdens come between you and support. Many are also providing virtual care right now, which is great. You can also ask friends, call clinics in your area. It just starts with a phone call. And sometimes you have to be the advocate for yourself, but then you get a lot of support. So when looking up, the best tools to recommend to somebody seeking help, ultimately it's going to be Google. You can just, whatever your symptoms are, or, there are a lot of mental health hotlines and things like that. So, you can always try that. But this WebMD article, it says, if you're embarrassed about asking for help, get over it, advises Weiss. Get past the stigma. The outcome is too important. So our culture might have a stigma on mental health right now, but if you take care of your physical body, you got to take care of your mental body. And I really hope this episode, if anything, helps you to do that in some way.
Well, this was big. And it felt like in the beginning, we weren't sure if we were going to have enough to talk about, but I feel like we got there and we talked about quite a few things. Do you want to share the tarot cards?
When preparing for the show, typically I pull tarot cards the day of the show and I do my final show prep. And these I happen to do. Amy and I had like I said, a really long discussion post show a couple weeks ago when I brought up the idea to do this. And the two cards I brought up made me upset, and I didn't want them to be our cards. So I had Amy draw cards, and she didn't get the same ones, but it was kind of the same message. And then when I had Amy interpret the cards that I drew, I was like, okay, universe, you were right. As usual. So the two cards that we got were the Devil. I kind of have a glare on the screen. And then the Ten of Swords. So the devil card in the tarot, so a lot of our interpretations, we go off the Biddy Tarot site or book. She has a lot of resources for new tarot card readers and seasoned tarot card readers alike. And then I use the Rider Waite tarot deck, which is kind of the original artwork. I'm kind of looking for interpretation. So the devil. This is the card, I feel like, the reason why so many people don't do tarot and have certain thoughts and feelings about it. They don't want this card and they don't want the death card. And I just didn't want it because this is a heavy show. Just give me the lovers, the two of cups, the 10 of cups, just something bright, shiny, happier days ahead. But Amy, do you want to share kind of some of your interpretations of this card? It's a devil mythological creature, kind of
Right.
like a goat
Right.
with a male and a female standing below him, with these loose chains around their neck, kind of binding them to each other, not even to him.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the main points, is that the chains are very loose. And so whether you feel like you're trapped in a situation or not, typically you're not, and that you actually do have the means to escape that situation or to get out of that situation. There's a lot of other, the devil is not, that is not an, it's not a easy card. It's a complex card. There's many different ways of interpreting it. So it can have some darkness in it, but there is actually also some, like, the fact that you can get out of these chains. If you look at the two people, like, the woman has this tail, and at the end of the tail, there's actually this fruit. So it's, you're like, what does that mean? It looks like it's almost like, I don't know, the tree of life or something, you know? But it can be addiction. It can be like the darker shadow side. It can be
Self-limiting beliefs.
self-limiting beliefs. But all of those things, you actually, I think the main thing with this card is that you do have the ability. And if you don't have the ability, just like what we were talking about, someone else can help you as well, just to kind of break free of these things.
Yeah, then what I really liked about the interpretation of the card and how I think it resonates with the show is kind of look at what might be holding you back from being your best self.
Mhm.
Oftentimes you're stuck in your own head about it and you're the one in your own way.
Mhm.
So even though we might have all these external factors, to your point earlier when you were asking me, well, what are you going to do about it? Like I can continue to seek help. I can, reach out. All these things came up for me. And so kind of
Mhm.
thinking for yourself, what's maybe holding you back from your best self. If you're having a lot of negative feelings, or if you're not liking how you're reacting to certain things in your environment or restrictions put on you, kind of sitting back and reflecting on, well, what is it really? How is it holding me back from being my best
Mhm.
self? And how can I, within my power, change that? So then the other card, the Ten of Swords, is a man laying down on the ground with 10 swords in his back. And what I like
Just straight
about
up in his
right,
back.
what I like about this card though is when you get it in the reverse, all the swords are falling out and all your troubles and
Yeah.
worries are going away. I do not recall pulling it in reverse, although you can interpret cards however you want. But this card, it signifies you've been wounded, right? You've had a loss, crisis, a betrayal. But to move forward from the tens, which the tens are really, it doesn't go to 11 in the tarot
Right.
for the minor
Right.
arcana. So it's kind of like this
Mhm.
precipice before a new beginning or before a new.
Right.
And so this, kind of letting go and accepting circumstances and quit resisting the change. um we always love the change we put upon ourselves and we hate the change that's put upon us by circumstances or other people's or things
It's
like
so
that.
true. It's
And
also learning from it too, right? So if something has happened to you, if it's this huge thing, okay, what can you can step back? What can you learn from this? What can you glean from this? How, like we talked about before, how can you do something differently now?
yeah, and when we were first talking about it, when you're encouraging me to keep the cards that I drew, I think you said, it's always darkest before the dawn, and so I think that's
Right.
really what these two cards are really
Yeah.
representing. And
And
so
I feel like I'm just going to jump right into the teaser
yeah,
for the next show after this. Like, okay, it's always darkest before the dawn. The next show, um, we really want to talk about releasing and then allowing. And And a way to think about that would be almost like a personal spring cleaning, right? So think about all the
Mental
stuff.
spring cleaning.
Yeah, all the stuff that's up in your head. Like sometimes I go for a walk and I'm like, okay, can we just settle down up there?
You know, when I
Like,
was experiencing all this anxiety in January, I actually had a conversation with myself where, like, you're in control of what goes on in here. Why are we
yes.
not having a good time?
Why? I'm the boss of you. So, so hopefully we can get to the point where we're like, oh, that's why we're not having a good time. Well, let's get rid of that junk and let that in. And I'm gonna have to, of course, reference Frozen, like Let It Go. And one thing that I will reference now and again during the show is that when she sings Let It Go, not only is she releasing like the burden of who she was or who she had to be, but she's also letting her powers go and letting them out. So just remember that when you release, you're also creating space and allowing that space for good things. So
Oh, I'm looking forward to next.
yeah, I think I
I'm
am too.
excited. Well, if this episode spoke to your soul, please share it with a friend. And if you have the time, give us some love on your preferred platform with a rate, review, and subscribe. You can also reach out to us via Instagram and YouTube under The Brightly Podcast or via email at brightlypodcast@gmail.com. And also, if you just want to share what you've been going through right now, either just with us or more publicly on social media, we can create a community here with other Brightly listeners. I call them the brightest. So please,
I love it.
reach out. And again,
Yeah.
there are resources if you need help more than just a friend to turn to right now.
Yeah, actually, we hope to hear from you. And we also hope you have a bright and beautiful day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.